Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button if you guys are enjoying the content that we're throwing up. And make sure you guys hit the like button if you enjoy the video. And yeah, let's begin. Marvel's God Mutant is coming back, and I am so excited. Man, let me tell you something. Okay, so here's Cy Spurrier, man. So Cy Spurrier is the one doing Way of X. Normally, I would do these in order, right? I would do Way of X number 1, and then I would do Way of X number 2, but the fact that I'm doing this out of order should show you anything that I'm super excited. So Marvel's God Mutant is coming back, and initially this comic opens up with Legion. That's hint number 1. It's not Legion. Legion's super powerful. Legion's amazing, and I love this. I love like the power. Okay, those of you guys who are unfamiliar with Legion, Legion has essentially an infinite number of personalities, and each personality has a power. Now, they don't all have different powers. That's an important thing that I do want to make a distinction of. They don't have different powers, right? Like you have whole bunches of personalities that can manipulate fire. You have whole bunches of personalities like the Origamist that can manipulate reality on different levels. You do have really cool personalities like Susan and Sunshine. I love Susan and Sunshine. She's like the cutest of the personalities, but also like the most horrifying at the same time because she can just screw with you so bad. But nonetheless, it's one of these cool things, right? So the way this picks up is you essentially have Legion attacking Nightcrawler. One of the things to know, Legion is probably just one of these really socially awkward people, right? Like Legion doesn't know how to convey his emotions. It's really the way Legion works, right? David is a little wonky here. A lot of it's because he's just so socially repressed. And so because of that, him attacking Nightcrawler, it does serve a particular purpose. And the reason why is because he's looking to investigate the mind of Nightcrawler. And he's looking to understand Nightcrawler's mind because what he wants to know is whether or not Nightcrawler is a person who can be trusted. Now, when he does enter his mind, it's actually really cool. So initially Legion thought it was going to be like, and he even says it's like, this is not what I was expecting, right? He thought it was going to be all churchy, right? Like stained glass and pews and altars and all that kind of stuff, which makes sense because most of you guys who've been reading Marvel Comics long enough know that Nightcrawler's devoutly religious. But one of the cool things is that religion never really governed his life, right? He didn't live and die by his religious convictions. He kind of has done things in the past that are not really in line with religion as you traditionally see it. And he'll do the same thing in this comic too, right? But what you end up getting here is like this old age of like storms and like ships on the sea, right? So like pirates and so on and so forth. So essentially like the 1800s, and it's amazing. And it like these ships, or at least this one particular ship, is being manned by all these different versions of Nightcrawler. Now, something to know here is that Legion found something in the mind of Nightcrawler, and we won't really find out what it is until much later on, right? But it is going to be a super cool thing. The big thing that Legion has here is a kind of artifact that he extracted from Nightcrawler. And again, we'll talk more about that here in a minute, but it's one of these things where this basically confirms what it is that Legion was looking for, and then Nightcrawler can be trusted here, right? So he's like, okay, I put coordinates in your brain. Meet me in that location in 10 minutes and find some people you can trust, right? So he immediately beelines back to Krakoa, and we end up coming across Dr. Nemesis and Fabien Cortez. Now, Fabien Cortez, I'm not gonna lie, he's probably as unimportant as anybody could be here on the island of Krakoa. But there was a time when Fabien Cortez was amazing, and I've actually got, I still need to give those away, the comics from XMen Volume 2. I want to keep like the first 4 or 5 for myself, right? Because those are like when Omega Red first showed up, different things like that. But Fabien Cortez was a character who appeared in Marvel Comics, and he has the power to boost the abilities of other people. There was a point when he first showed up in Marvel, he was basically a kind of religious zealot in the sense that he saw Magneto as like the Lord and Savior of the human race. If you guys ever watched X-Men, the animated series, and you remember that that episode, what is it, the 2-part episode Sanctuary, where you have like Fabien Cortez and those guys, the Acolytes, right? That's a pretty accurate depiction of Fabien Cortez, at least personality-wise anyway. Not all the actions that he engaged in were accurate, but in terms of personality, that's pretty accurate here. But again, this is just one of those instances, and I kind of like that Marvel does this. It's one of these instances where you just kind of have this person who was at one point a major foe of the X-Men who's just kind of on Krakoa, right? Because it's one of the things, for those of you guys who are kind of picking up on the X-Men at the moment, kind of, let me sidetrack for a second for all of you guys who've been reading it for a long time. Those of you guys who are just kind of joining us, the idea behind Krakoa is it's basically a mutant nation, and so it's one of these places where when Xavier and Magneto and Moira McTaggart founded it, it was kind of like this idea of all past transgressions are kind of forgiven, but not really, right? But at the end of the day, there's no like us as mutants and you as mutants. There's no more factions, right? There's simply just us as the mutant population. It was a complete and total coming together of the mutant race on a singular island. Those guys who were like really big dicks, right? Like Apocalypse or something like that, they were a little wary. Like some people were a little wary of them, but it's one of these things where it's just kind of like a safe safe haven, right? So everybody kind of puts past indiscretions and they all just kind of unite under a single banner, right? Now, Dr. Nemesis is exceedingly important here. And this really, in a lot of ways, comes out of the story Age of X. Now, I don't know how many of you guys ever read that story, and if you didn't, make sure you guys check the description. One of the things that we're doing now is we're linking like all the parts, or really like the whole playlist for a series down in the description, so you guys can get caught up with the most recent episodes or stories if you want to. But Dr. Nemesis is a person that has a lot of dealings with Legion, and he really understands, as best he can anyway, the ins and outs of Legion's mind. And so if ever you were going to take anybody with you to quite literally navigate the mind of Legion, Dr. Nemesis is the one to do it. But one of the big things that you kind of have here is Nightcrawler just pops out of nowhere, right? And is like, okay, so I need some people to come with me, right? So he ultimately ends up snatching up Pixie, who basically is a character that has magical powers, and actually was at one point, kind of a fun little fact here, she was at one point in line to be considered to become the Sorcerer Supreme instead of Stephen Strange. But it's one of these things, because of the magical power she possesses, Marvel's kind of hit at over the years that Pixie would be stupidly powerful if she was ever truly trained in the mystic arts by Stephen Strange, right? She would rival even him in terms of her magical ability, which in this day and age is not overly impressive. Back in the 60s and 70s was insane, right? It would be kind of nuts. And so ultimately they end up arriving in the Rub al Khali Desert in Saudi Arabia. And so when they get there, of course, they meet with David Haller. And so one of the things that happens is they basically enter into the mind of David and kind of find out exactly what's going on here, right? That in essence, his personalities have run awry. Now, the best depiction of Legion's personalities really came in X-Men Legacy, right? The old X-Men Legacy story in the early to mid 2000s, really the mid to late 2000s. And what you kind of got here is that with Legion's different personalities who were here, because they are all essentially autonomous, they can think on their own, they have their own wants and desires and things like that, that it can really cause an absolute mess in the mind of Legion if they all just sort of run amok like they're doing here. And so what normally happens is Legion kind of has them in, well, I guess really prison cells is the best way to describe it. And whenever he needs to use the powers of one of his personalities, he basically siphons off the power of that personality, uses it, and then gives the power back to them when he's done. But it's almost like flipping through and grabbing cards, right? Is really kind of how that works. The biggest issue that you have here is that if you look at something like the old X-Men Legacy stories, where you had the quote-unquote prison break in Legion's mind, and all of his personalities were basically taking turns kind of using the body of Legion, that's sort of what's happening here now. The big difference is that a lot of this seems to have been engineered by Orcus. And in fact, you have like Nightcrawler and Pixie who are going through and facing off against all these personalities as best they can. Now, one of the big things that kind of goes on here, and it's sort of intriguing, is that Legion cannot actually fight against his own personalities. And this kind of comes by way of an explanation in terms of how all this happened in the first place. That what seems to have happened here is that the organization Orcus introduced the only, it's really just kind of described as an invasive exotic, right? To kind of speed up the collapse of Legion's mind. And essentially it's almost like introducing a virus or a foreign entity in his own mind that keeps them from stabilizing all these personalities and keeping them safely locked up. In essence, and it's really the best way that Legion describes it, the inmates are running the asylum and there's no way for him to corral them all back in. And the reason why is because some of these beings out there, some of the personalities he has are actually more powerful than Legion in his normal form. He's super powerful, right? He's an ultra high-end, like beyond Omega level telepath and telekinetic. But then you've got people like the Orgamist, right, who can alter reality even inside of his own mind. So it's very difficult for Legion to be able to pull this off. And so ultimately, because of the fact that this kind of system is expanding the way that it is, because the mind is quite literally falling apart and going into a state of degeneracy, basically meaning Legion's mind is destroying itself, which is really what all these different personalities kind of represent, the chaos that's going on inside his own brain, that you end up having the only real option that's there. The only option that's really given to us is that Legion's gonna have to die. Now again, because of the fact that Hickman established that superheroes can essentially be resurrected, this is the kind of thing we were talking about here, right? And that's why when House of X and Powers of X first launched, and Jonathan Hickman was just like, we're basically killing off the idea of death, a lot of people kind of rolled their eyes and they were like, oh my god, really? But it's a really great thing here, because instead of using death as like a shock value thing, like, oh my god, this character died, and you knew they were gonna come back, so their death had no real significance. Instead, they're using their death as significance, not insofar as the fact that they're gone and they're never going to come back, but using it as a method of storytelling. And this is one of those perfect examples, that one of the most powerful mutants in the world, who has an infinite number of personalities, and each personality having a power, has lost control of all those personalities, and by default, lost control of his mind. And so it's only a matter of time before he quite literally becomes a power bomb, in the sense that, like, when he goes off, all of creation will go with it, right? Like, at the very least, the world will go with it, but seemingly the whole universe would go with it. And so the only thing to do here is to kill him, so that he can basically be reborn on Krakoa with all this madness kind of back in stability again. Because remember, whenever they resurrect people in Krakoa, they essentially use a quote-unquote backed up version of their mind. So it's like when you restore your computer from a backup. And seemingly, the backup they have for Legion is a backup that exists before Orchis did all this stuff and messed with his head. And so what ends up happening here is you kind of get, again, this questionable moment with Nightcrawler, where essentially, instead of allowing Dr. Nemesis to do it, because it more or less falls in the line of murder, that you end up having Nightcrawler who's like, I will do it instead. Because at the very least, he can do it from a place of selflessness and do it from a place of religious conviction. And so what this kind of means is that his soul, quote unquote, wouldn't necessarily be tainted. But this is one of those questionable things, because even Nightcrawler says, like he tells Legion, you are not your flaws, David Haller. And if destroying a lump of empty meat will help you to start afresh, to rule yourself, well, perhaps there are sins worth sinning. And so it's not as though Nightcrawler approaches this from the perspective of like, Father bless me for what it is that I'm about to do, or Father forgive me for what it is that I'm about to do. His soul is cleansed from executing Legion. It's not really coming from that perspective. It's, hey, look, like sometimes we just have to do things that we don't want to do because it's what's best for everybody else. And so ultimately he essentially pulls the trigger and just basically kills Legion's mind, right? Like just like shoots Legion's mind on the spot. That's kind of the crazy thing, is because David Haller, as you've seen him here this entire time, is not physically David Haller, right? It's just kind of his mind essence. And that's why he was showing up in a kind of astral form, because it's just him more or less leaving his physical body, right? But it's one of these crazy things, because everything that's gone on here and what Orchis did by screwing with Legion's mind, that all leads to something big. And this big thing gets revealed when you basically have Legion who's resurrected through the protocols, right? And so of course, like once he comes back, it's a pretty big to-do, right? There's a lot going on here. Like there's a lot of excitement and a lot of curiosity, because a lot of people are just kind of like, I mean, it's a little wild, because one of the things that's kind of hit on here is that there's this almost sense of unease that permeates everybody in Krakoa. This kind of feeling that something's coming that's going to cause all kinds of hell, right? Like something's coming that's going to turn everything they know and love completely and totally upside down. And so once David Haller's restored, of course, he chooses to continue going by the name Legion. And then one of the things he establishes here is he doesn't trust Charles Xavier, his father, and he doesn't trust Magneto. He doesn't really trust either of them, but he does trust Nightcrawler. And the reason why is because he says, okay, like I'm gonna borrow, Nightcrawler for a minute, and we're just gonna go have a conversation together. And as the two of them are talking, you get this really, really interesting thing where they start talking about what it was that Legion found in the head of Nightcrawler. And when he says like, do you remember that thing that I found? And Nightcrawler's like, yes, right? That kind of poisonous coin. And that's where Nightcrawler's like, it's, if I'm being honest, it sounds like whatever Orchis did to you, they're already doing to us here, right? Like they somehow found a way to infect us already. And so in essence, this virus, right? This kind of rampancy that's going on in our heads, it's only a matter of time before it fully manifests, and it scares the heck out of me. This is what's so cool, is because what was going on there, and something that was kind of haunting Nightcrawler, and this idea that Legion had hit on, that he had like all these questions that he wasn't really vocalizing, that Nightcrawler asked Legion, do you know who the Patchwork Man is? And the response of Legion is, yes, I do. I can sense him, Kurt, clear as day. And there's a good reason I didn't say so to Dad or Magneto. That's your second hint, Xavier and Magneto. In what instance have we ever heard of this ridiculously powerful force that basically has to do with Xavier and Magneto? Legion says parents don't always think straight when it comes to their heirs, but he says this thing, this Patchwork Man, it's Onslaught, Kurt. Onslaught's coming back. Onslaught's coming back. Onslaught's coming back, son, man. Onslaught is coming back. And I'm so excited. With that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.